Okay, everybody, it is that time again where I am talking about the Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail review. And because of what I'm covering today, unfortunately, I have to run with OBS audio. Hopefully it's not as bad as it was last time. Let me know in the comments down below. Sorry everybody. And of course, because I'm using OBS, let's just say that tweaking what I'm saying and stuff like that is going to be harder. So apologies in advance if let's just say I'm not a very, good orator. So, yeah, basically, let's get into it. Here we have a review. Okay, we're going to be doing a review of some research that I did for Dawntrail. And essentially, I'd like to first explain what I did and why I did it. And I want to talk about what I discovered and why this basically matters and how this affects how we're experiencing this game. I guess it began with the sense that I had. I had this sense in Dawntrail that the pacing was off, and I sensed that things felt slower, and I didn't understand what it was. I felt like we weren't engaging, and I was so confused, right? I was so confused about what was going on, and so I kept saying throughout my playthrough that something felt a little bit off, and I thought it was something related to the pacing. So as you can imagine, I wanted to double check what I was experiencing because I don't always trust exactly what I'm experiencing, because we can always have a sense that something's off, but we don't know exactly why that is. And so in this little video, well, it could end up being quite a long video, but in this video we're going to take a look at some I say some, but at a deep dive into Final Fantasy XIV's narrative structure, to talk about pacing and how we experience the MSQ. And in order to do this, I had to do quite a bit of work behind the scenes. It was part of the reason why it took me so long to put this review out. So let's take a look together at what I did. So the first thing that I did is, you can see here, and the first thing that I did was I went through each expansion and I played the first 25 quests, So 1 to 25. So in this case, this is Limsa, all right? And there were different quests, but I focused on the Limsa one as an example. But basically, with Gridania and Ul'dah, that is like I didn't do Ul'dah and Gridania, but with Limsa, for example, I tracked what were the steps. I tracked how many cutscenes there were. Okay, how many cutscenes there were per quest. I tracked as well which quests had combat, which quests had set pieces like a solo duty, which quests involved interactions like clicking on something, not counting the dialogue boxes, which quest, if any, had a dungeon or trial, and which quest had emotes or some sort of interactions with emotes, and all of that. So we had cutscenes, solo duties, general fighting, optional fighting, set pieces, dungeons and trials, emotes, and interactions. And we also had how many steps were required per quest. So I did this for A Realm Reborn, as you can see here. I did it for Heavensward, so we got here the steps, cutscenes, solo duties, general fighting, etc., set pieces, dungeons, emotes, and interactions. So all of that. And you can see I did it for Stormblood, the first 25 quests. I did it for Shadowbringers. All right, so I'm going to just actually drag this over here. Okay, I did it for Endwalker. So you can see here, I did it for Endwalker. And I did it for Dawntrail. Okay, so as you can see, we got all of that in there for the first 25 quests. Now, after I did that, I knew that I needed some more data, so I then took it upon myself to check out the first 50 quests of A Realm Reborn, the first 50 quests of Shadowbringers, and the first 50 quests of Dawntrail. And the reason why I did this is because Dawntrail's beginning, the feats section of Dawntrail, is generally determined to be the weakest point of that expansion. So a lot of people say that once you get to Shalawani, once you get to Solution 9, things start picking up and are more interesting. And that is certainly true to a degree. But I wanted to see why it's true. And is it because there's not enough combat? And so I decided to take a look at A Realm Reborn and compare it to Dawntrail, because both are supposed to be the beginning of their 10-year cycles, right? So A Realm Reborn started the cycle, the 10-year cycle, basically ignoring 1.0, and Dawntrail is supposed to be the start of its cycle. So it's very fair to compare it to A Realm Reborn. But there was some things that I noticed in Dawntrail that was clearly not the case in A Realm Reborn. And I wanted to see if the issue that I was having in Dawntrail was going to also appear in Shadowbringers. And the reason why I chose Shadowbringers and not Endwalker is because if you ask your average Final Fantasy Andy, they're going to tell you that Shadowbringers is the best expansion. And most of them will like it more than Endwalker. Now, I'm one of those who actually likes Endwalker just a little titch more than Shadowbringers, like a tiny titch more. But most people will tell you that they really, really love Shadowbringers. So I decided, even though it's unfair, it's patently unfair to compare Dawntrail to Shadowbringers, I decided to do it anyway. Because I am an evil person. I just had to know, all right? And I wanted to see, how did Dawntrail compare against Shadowbringers, and how did it compare against A Realm Reborn? Now, in terms of feeling like it's split in the middle, perhaps the most obvious comparison would be Stormblood, and I certainly will make some comments about Stormblood later on, but essentially I decided to compare it to Realm Reborn because Dawntrail is it's supposed to be the beginning, just like Realm Reborn. And I compared it to Shadowbringers because Shadowbringers is basically everybody's favorite. And what I decided to do is I wanted to see if I crunched this data down and I started making comparisons, what would I find? Okay, so this involved a lot of spreadsheeting, which is my favorite. And we'll talk about other things on in this spreadsheet, but essentially you can see here that I had a bunch of information that I was essentially like trying to collate various information. So if we take a look here, you're just going to see loads of numbers. Okay, so loads of numbers related to steps, cutscenes, combat, interactions, dungeons, trials, average steps, so on, so on. And guess what? I'm not going to actually make you like go through and read those numbers. Who wants to look at a number? No. We want to look at wonderful pie charts, don't we? So I decided to make a PowerPoint for everybody. Okay, so here's the PowerPoint. Final Fantasy 14 narrative stats by Chieko Kurokumo. All right, let's get into let's get into this, shall we? All right, so here we got some ratios here. pie charts, yes. So we have A Realm Reborn up here with a large chunk of interactions. So a lot of clicking on, let's say, a dialogue choice, or clicking on the ground, picking something up, giving it to somebody. That's what we're talking about here. So we have a lot of like interacting with the environment, interacting with, let's say, a thing on the ground, or a thing. It could be anything, really, right? Poking somebody, emoting at somebody, all of that is involved in interactions. So this is not to be confused with clicking a dialogue box to the next dialogue box. I'm not talking about that interaction. I'm talking about like doing something within the world that at least makes you move your mouse and you know, think a little bit more beyond the narrative, making you think. Then we have cutscenes. In A Realm Reborn, 29.4% cutscenes. So 29%, like almost 30% of the first 25 quests, okay? 30% of the first 25 quests is cutscenes. So you can see here the interactions to the cutscenes. There are a lot of interactions compared to cutscenes in A Realm Reborn. That might blow your mind. That might blow your mind. Only yesterday I was in a dungeon and there were people shitting on A Realm Reborn, and I thought to myself, you guys, no. I didn't say anything. But anyway, then we have combat at 15%. We have a dungeon. So that's 1.5%. And then we have the solo duties. We have some solo duties in here. Okay, now we got to keep an eye on these colors. These colors will never change. But you can see that we have a large portion of interactivity, followed by a fairly large portion of cutscenes. But we have a nice little side stuff here related to combat, dungeons, which is more combat, solo duty or set pieces, which is more combat. Now let's compare this to Heavensward. Wow. Well, what can we say? The cutscenes amped up to 60%. The interactions went down to 18%. The combat went to 15%, so about the same amount as A Realm Reborn. And the solo duties went to 6%, right? 6 to 7%. So a bit more solo duties, but you notice no dungeon. No dungeon. Missing dungeon. So that's something to think about. Okay, now can you keep all of this in your head? We're going to keep going. Stormblood continues what Heavensward began. So once again, we got a large portion of cutscenes at 58% compared to A Realm Reborn's 29% and Heavensward's 60%. So there's a few less cutscenes than Heavensward, with a few more interactions at 26%. But you can see here the combat's at 11, solo duty went down to 4.3%, and you can see no dungeon. Within the first 25 quests, there is no dungeon. Okay, now let's get to Shadowbringers. You can see there's a lot more interactions in Shadowbringers, so 53%. So if we go back to A Realm Reborn, this is more interactions than A Realm Reborn. And A Realm Reborn had a lot of interactions. But what were these interactions? I just want to make a side note on these interactions. Most of these interactions are not actually clicking on something to make something happen. Most of these interactions were personalized dialogue choices. So do you remember how I said before that I'm not counting clicking on a dialogue box to go to the next dialogue box? What I did include, though, was making a choice for something that your character has to say. Shadowbringers, as far as I have been able to determine, has perhaps the most player-facing dialogue interactions. Probably Endwalker. I think Endwalker also had high level of interactions where they required your character to say something or react to something. So Shadowbringers and Endwalker has this high level of interactivity in terms of letting your character say something. This is important. This will come back later. But if we're talking about clicking on something to make something happen, or to deliver something, or to hand something over, or to click on a place on the ground in order to fight something in combat, not a lot of that. So that's an important distinction to make here. And perhaps if I had been more thoughtful and considered that, I would have made these 2 different colors, but it is what it is. I'm just letting you know that this is the way it is. Okay, so then if you see here, we got cutscenes down to 38%. We have a dungeon, and we have some combat at 7.0. So you can see here that we have some combat and we have a dungeon, but you notice what's missing in Shadowbringers? A solo duty. So there's no solo duty or any other set pieces in Shadowbringers. So you just get the one dungeon, you get some combat, you get a bunch of cutscenes, and then we got this interactions. So if we go back to A Realm Reborn, you can see here the cutscenes are more than A Realm Reborn. And the interactions are almost equal to A Realm, or over A Realm Reborn. Like they're within the same kind of space. But what's interesting is that A Realm Reborn saved some of its interactions and some of its cutscene energy for other combat, whereas the combat in Shadowbringers compared to Realm Reborn is much decreased. That's something to consider. Please consider that. Okay. Now we get to Endwalker. Things, if possible, get even more interesting because we have the same level of interactions as we did in Shadowbringers, if not more in Endwalker. So within the first 25 quests, we got a lot of us saying things, reacting to things. There's some clicking on stuff. There is some, interaction with the environment. A lot of it, though, is us talking to people and having opinions. Now, the cutscenes, you can see the cutscene went up 37%. So this is around the same amount of cutscenes as Shadowbringers. And just like Shadowbringers, there is some combat and there is one dungeon. So you can see here that just like Shadowbringers, Endwalker and Shadowbringers is literally the same, right? Shadowbringers and Endwalker is literally the same. But you can see here that they have decreased in combat. You notice that? There's a decrease in combat. So think about that for a bit. Okay, now let's take a look at Dawntrail. First 25 quests. We have 53% interactions. So this is less interactions than Endwalker, around the same amount of interactions as Shadowbringers. And you can see that the cutscenes are a bit more than Endwalker and a bit more than Shadowbringers, but not by much. Okay, so this is basically very similar. But what's so fascinating with Dawntrail is that we get a dungeon, we get combat, and we get a solo duty. We get like a set piece. So this is quite different. This is quite different. So as you can see here, there is a bit more movement toward having some interactions here that is related to combat. So why? So this is where I start thinking, is this change, this return to variety, which we haven't seen since A Realm Reborn, okay? Is this return to variety like normal for Dawntrail? And like it's still tiny, right? This variety here that we see compared to, let's say, A Realm Reborn is still tiny. There's still it's minuscule amount of variety compared to A Realm Reborn, but at least it's kind of there. So then why did I feel the way that I felt? So I had to do more research, obviously. And I had to find out what was going on in Shadowbringers and A Realm Reborn and Endwalker. So I did more. I did more digging. I went back. Can you believe this? Okay. I played Dawntrail to 25 quests because the Wikipedia didn't have all of the information. So then I had to go back and continue for the next 25 quests. So I've now played Dawntrail, I think 4 times. Anyway, it was wild. And then I actually went and I replayed Shadowbringers to to the 50th quest. and I double-checked the Wikipedia because I didn't trust the Wikipedia. So I double-checked the Wikipedia for Realm Reborn and Shadowbringers by replaying it and making sure that Wikipedia was correct. And then once I figured out that most of it was correct, then I relied on the Wikipedia for some of this. But for Dawntrail, the Wikipedia isn't filled in, so I had to do Dawntrail on my own. So what did I discover? Well, I think you can see with your eyes here that by the level 50, so by 50 quests in, okay, by the time you have played 50 quests, your variety starts kicking in, right? You start to get some solo duties, you start to get your dungeons, you start to get your combat, you start to get more cutscenes and more interactions. But you can see, I think, with your eyes here, that A Realm Reborn is really balanced. Like, this is crazy. Like, if we compare it to Shadowbringers and Dawntrail, A Realm Reborn is really balanced. A Realm Reborn has solo duties coming out of the wazoo. It has more dungeons. It has combat, much more combat, and the interactions and cutscenes are equal. So not only is your character saying things, not only is your character clicking on the environment and doing all these different kinds of things, we have the cutscenes, but there's a high level of interaction in A Realm Reborn. When people talk about A Realm Reborn being boring at the beginning, yeah, it is slower moving because we're just getting started. We don't understand everything that's going on. There's a lot of small little things that we're doing at the beginning. But if we're talking about interactivity as gamers, there's a lot more going on in A Realm Reborn than in Shadowbringers. Look at Shadowbringers. It is a travesty. Shadowbringers had a high level of us, being a character and having an opinion and talking, and there was some clicking and getting some stuff done in the world, but holy moly. Look at that combat, holy moly. And as I was replaying Shadowbringers, the first 25 quests or so, I was really struck by how little we actually do, and it gets worse after the first 25. So after you get out of the first dungeon, Holminster Switch, things just they just start crawling. In fact, if I recall correctly, the Yulmore sequence with Alphino, as much as I love it, the Yulmore sequence without Yulmore technically has almost nothing going on in terms of hitting something. Now, does that mean that we always have to be killing things? Am I trying to say that a narrative has no meaning if we aren't killing things? No. But there's a level of agency that a video gamer wants to have, and we have to ask ourselves what's going on if this is not happening. We need to ask ourselves what's going on. And we have to ask ourselves further, why are people saying that Dawntrail is boring and slow and is missed opportunities? Why is it an expansion of missed opportunities of not having solo duties that it should have, when in the first 50 quests of Shadowbringers, we have almost nothing? Nothing. So this immediately told me that either people are incredibly biased about Shadowbringers, have rose-tinted glasses on, and absolutely don't know what they're talking about, or something else is going on with Dawntrail. And that's kind of where I essentially landed. And to kind of cement my positions I'd like to talk about steps. So let's get into steps. So steps are how many things or how many steps do you have per quest, and basically like how many steps do you have overall. So essentially for the first 25 quests, there are 94 steps in A Realm Reborn, 83 steps in Heavensward, 76 steps in Stormblood. And then we go from 76 steps in Stormblood, we go up to 131 steps for the first 25 quests, 131 in Shadowbringers, 132 in Endwalker, and 132 in Dawntrail. So you can see that in general, the story has become formalized to such a degree that they have the same amount of steps for the last 3 expansions. Think about who's been in charge of the last 3 anyway. So you can see here that this is it's going in a downward trend. Things are feeling really immediate. We're getting through each quest quickly. We're feeling like we're hearing the quest dopamine ding, right? We're hearing that. You got this done, you got this done, you got this done. And things are moving along within the first 25 quests. Like, you only have 76 steps in the first 25 quests in Stormblood. Going up to, we're talking like almost double. Not quite. But you can see what I'm saying here. Like, this is almost half, like times 2 going into Shadowbringers. And you might be thinking, what's the big deal? Why are you focusing on this? Well, I just feel that if we have more steps per quest, this is going to slow down the sense of finishing things. It just is. And in fact, if I click out of here, if I go in here, and I think I put in ratios. Let's see if I put in the ratio down here. The average step per quest in A Realm Reborn was 3.76. In Heaven's Word, it was 3.26. In Stormblood, it was 3.0. And we go up to 5.24 in Shadowbringers, 5.64 in Endwalker, and 5.26 in Dawntrail. So Dawntrail actually is, in terms of average steps per quest, Dawntrail is a little less than Endwalker and about on par with Shadowbringers. So once again, not to belabor this point, there is a sense of slowness that starts to creep in with Shadowbringers. Okay, so let's get to cutscene amounts. Cutscene amounts. This is fascinating. Okay, so cutscenes. How many cutscenes within the first 25 quests? A look at A Realm Reborn. It is insane. I couldn't believe my eyes, okay? This sludgy, boring expansion, supposedly, has less cutscenes to deal with than Heaven's Word, which is almost goes double A Realm Reborn. Then Stormblood added a few more cutscenes on top of what Heaven's Word was doing, so not too much. Then we shoot up for Shadowbringers. We drop a little for Endwalker, and crazy because, you know, some parts of Endwalker felt really slow at the beginning because there was like what felt like a lot of talking. But yeah, and then it shoots up again with Dawntrail. Now, one thing I do want to add a caveat here. I didn't time the cutscenes, but I will say this. Overall, I do feel that the time length of these cutscenes did increase over time, and that we're more likely to have longer cutscenes later in later expansions as they had more money and more abilities to kind of lean into their narrative. And the narrative does require it. But you can see here, we have lots and lots and lots and lots of cutscenes. And then we have Dawntrail with even more cutscenes. So this also is probably going to point us to another problem. So that is where we have a problem. Because you can see in A Realm Reborn, there are cutscenes, but they aren't, you know, all over the wazoo. And this is particularly crucial if you're starting out with a new expansion or like a new cycle of things. You really want to keep things hopping, right? You want to keep things hopping. So A Realm Reborn actually having less, given that they've been cutting, they've been polishing this particular expansion. Is it still everyone's cup of tea? Probably not. Is it still very much, you know, baby learning how to play the MMO? Absolutely. But A Realm Reborn, in terms of pacing, in terms of amount of cutscenes, is nowhere near as brutal as some of the later expansions. If you hate cutscenes, A Realm Reborn is actually not the problem. Now, by the time we get to Shadowbringers, I feel that Shadowbringers and Endwalker, they earned these cutscenes, right? This is the result of build-up. This is the result of time spent in a narrative, building up characters, building up a situation. This totally makes sense. I'm not throwing shade on Shadowbringers and Endwalker here for having more cutscenes, because that's the point. These are the climaxes and resolutions of a 10-year cycle. The problem is Dawntrail. What were they doing? They really should have brought Dawntrail back down to at least Stormblood level. Like, they should have cut it really down, because you want to have that energy of movement in the story and not have these major cutscenes. I think there's a mistake sometimes that some people may have made here, thinking that more cutscenes will explain more and therefore let the characters know let us know what's going on. But in fact, sometimes it's better just to experience what's going on. But then the question asks, is there anything to experience? And that is where the answer lies. Okay, so now let's get to total combat. Yeah. Total combat. So this is 25 quests, right? The first 25 quests, you get into the expansion. How much combat are you doing? How much killing are you doing in the MSQ? Yeah. A Realm Reborn is slaying, literally and metaphorically here. A Realm Reborn has a lot of combat, just a lot. And there are some people who don't understand this. Like recently I made a mistake of clicking on some I'm not going to point out the content creator, because like I have no beef against that content creator and I love that content creator, but that content creator's community is a little unhinged. So anyway, they were talking about Final Fantasy 14 and they're like, oh my gosh, it was so much talking, I just wanted to kill things. And I'm like, are you okay? Because in A Realm Reborn, you're pretty much like, if you're focused, okay, and you're listening and you're clicking on the boxes and giving each box, its fair amount of time, but not overthinking things too much. If you're working steadily through A Realm Reborn, you're going to hit combat probably within, I would say, half an hour. Because pretty much after Baderon talks with you, he sends you off to your guild tells you to go out kill things. If you go back to Baderon after completing that quest, he will send you out to kill things. So you'll have basically two quests side by side that you will be able to go out and start killing things. That's the same with Momodi and Mion. Same thing happens, okay? This is not I don't understand. Like, you're killing things right away. You're going out and you're slaying right away. In Heaven's Word, there's a little less combat, but still quite a bit. I was surprised by Heaven's Word, how many solo duties you get to do straight out of the gate. Nuts. Nut bar. Absolute crazy. And then with Stormblood, there's less combat even so, but there still is a nice amount of combat. Stuff starts dropping with Shadowbringers. Stuff really drops with Endwalker. That's why Endwalker felt so slow. Even though Endwalker didn't have a ton of cutscenes compared to Shadowbringers, because the amount of combat wasn't there, it still felt slower. And then you can see here, Dawntrail actually improved on combat. That's my brain exploding. Because you see, the whole time I was playing Dawntrail, I was like, why does this feel so slow? And later on, when I went back and replayed Shadowbringers, I was like, oh, it's actually more comparable to Shadowbringers. Holy moly. What's going on? So Endwalker, as much as I love that expansion, is quite slow. Now, once again, I don't have beef against Shadowbringers and Endwalker not having lots of combat. It is what it is. But when people are talking about Dawntrail not having enough combat, I don't think they've actually sat down and really thought about what they were experiencing in Shadowbringers and Endwalker, because these last two expansions, Shadowbringers and Endwalker, they didn't have as much combat as A Realm Reborn. Just saying. Okay, so then let's compare this combat. So if we take these two things here, we're having in A Realm Reborn, we're having this combat that's slowly dropping in amount over time through to Endwalker, and then picks up again in Dawntrail. In reality, Dawntrail should have actually been pushing up that combat. Like I said, it should have been at least Stormblood level, if not Heavensward level. So they should have pushed that combat up. And if you take a look at the cutscenes slowly rise over time as the combat goes down over time. And that's fine with Shadowbringers and Endwalker because, you know, they earned it. But with Dawntrail, those cutscenes should have been cut. Those cutscenes should have gone down. Yeah. So the ratios are just off. And as a result, because, and if we're talking about the first 25 quests here, because the combat is so high and because the cutscenes are so low in A Realm Reborn, if you actually go back and play A Realm Reborn again, it's going to feel way more immediate. You run in, you're like, hey, Battleron, what's up? He's like, okay, we're going to give you something small to do. Let's test what you can do. And also remember to sign into your guild. You go to your guild, you get your first guild quest. So then you go out as part of the MSQ, and then you have the side killing quest, right, with your guild. You go out, you start killing animals. You go back in. The guild levels you up probably. Talking to Battleron probably levels you up. Battleron's like, hey, I got a buddy. He's out in Summerford Farm. Help him out, will you? So you go over there. He's like, hey, bro, we need some help with this and this. Why don't you go deal with that? That involves more killing. That involves more interaction with the environment. That involves picking something up and carrying it. That involves procking some mobs and killing the mobs, right? I think you actually go down to Seasong Grotto and you kill some mobs there or whatever. And then at the same time, okay, I'm not even counting this in, all right? But at the same time, as you're doing all of these quests involving all of this combat, simultaneously, this is an invisible line. You can imagine an invisible line next to Realm Reborn, Heavensward, and Stormblood. There's an invisible line of combat that's given to you from your role quests. We'll talk about them in a little bit. But there's a lot of combat and opportunity for fighting in A Realm Reborn compared to Dawntrail, Endwalker, and Shadowbringers. And I think there's some people who have forgotten or have not played the new version of A Realm Reborn, and they have no idea how it's changed, how much has been cut. It is way more sleek now. Now, is it exciting compared to what we find out in Shadowbringers? Is it exciting compared to what we find out in Endwalker? No. But it doesn't need to be. That's not the point of the beginning of an expansion. So anyway, I feel that Dawntrail should have pushed up its combat and it should have cut down on its cutscenes. Essentially, it should have looked at the first 3 expansions of the game instead of the high points. And this is where I think the accolades and the high talking of Shadowbringers and Endwalker may have skewed some creatives' perception on what is actually required for the beginning of a cycle as opposed to the end of a cycle. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about combat variety. So this is combat variety in general. You can see that A Realm Reborn has solo duty, general fighting, and dungeons. Heavensward and Stormblood only have solo duties and general fighting. You notice that. Shadowbringers and Endwalker only have general fighting and dungeons. So when I mean general fighting, I mean you go out to some place, you click on a destination, and something spawns. Or you go to a place, you see the purple ring with the mobs waiting, you go in there, you kill them. That's general fighting. That's like fighting out in the wild, in a zone, as part of the MSQ. So, A Realm Reborn is one of the only ones that has solo duty, general fighting, and a dungeon and trial. And guess what? Dawntrail has a solo duty, general fighting, and dungeon and trial. So in some ways, Dawntrail has more combat variety than the best of the expansions in the game. So there's that to consider. So this, once again, this told me that the problem isn't just combat variety. It wasn't completely a missed opportunity in terms of combat. There's something else going on in Dawntrail that's making it feel the way it is, and it's not the combat, because Shadowbringers and Endwalker don't have the combat types, but no one's complaining about it as much as they did in Dawntrail. So something else is going on. Now, I personally think that some people who've been complaining about combat in Dawntrail in terms of pacing and stuff like that actually haven't adequately pointed out what the problem is. I will, of course, reveal what I believe to be the problem is. But this is, you can see here that they were attempting to get more combat. It's closer to Shadowbringers in amount of combat, and it does better than Shadowbringers in terms of variety of combat. So, yeah. Basically, in my opinion, if you look at amount of combat, A Realm Reborn and Heavensward are pretty much the peak moments, but A Realm Reborn just hits all of those spots. It really is, like, if you go back and replay those beginning zones, it really is pretty fantastic. Really, for the beginning of an MMO, it checks off a lot of good boxes. Now, if we talk about content types here for the first 50 quests, okay, so this is where things go off the rails. All right, so if we go back here, you can see here that Shadowbringers in the first 25 quests has this sense of having more combat, doesn't it? So it has technically like maybe 2 or 1 more pieces of combat than Dawntrail does, right? So you could say, oh, well, you know, Shadowbringers is better because it has more combat. And I'm pointing out that Dawntrail has more variety of combat, so that counts for something. But, like, it is less combat than Shadowbringers. Well, what happens when we extend another 25 quests to 50 quests? What happens in 50 quests? Oh my Lord. Shadowbringers. What happened? I don't know what happened. But anyway, this was fascinating. So, A Realm Reborn, A Realm Reborn, as you can see here, gets 6 solo duties. Count them. 6 solo duties within the first 50 quests. Has 16 general fighting related opportunities, 4 dungeons. Within 50 quests, Dawntrail has... within the first 50 quests, Shadowbringers has 1 solo duty, 10 general fighting, and 3 dungeon trials. And Dawntrail has 5 solo duties, 10 general fighting, and 4 dungeon trials. So just to double check everything here. So if we go over here, for example, I'm going to make it smaller so at first you guys won't be able to see everything here. But for example, we have a solo duty with Lurkers in the Grotto, which is where we first meet, I believe, Y'shtola. We have a solo duty, Just Desserts. We have Victory in Peril and Feint and Strike. So this, I think, is when we fight against the Ascian with the Golem, or Just Desserts might be the Golem, actually, because that's where we save the Limsa Lominsa guy. And then we have here Victory in Peril and Feint and Strike. This is related to Aleport, I believe, and Swift Perch. And then the company you keep down here, this is the Grand Company, where you basically have to go into a solo duty to save Biggs and Wedge. And that basically is the moment where you choose your grand, like it's basically when you have chosen your Grand Company, stuff like that. And of course, in terms of dungeons and trials, It's probably Pirates is Sestasha. Fire in the Gloom is I think that's Temterra Deepcroft. Into a Copper Hell, that's Copperbell Mines. And then down here, Lord of Inferno, we get to go up against Ifrit. So that gives us 3 dungeons and 1 trial in the first 50 quests. We get 3 dungeons and 1 trial. Now, of course, this is like something that you might not think of right away, but like that just shows to you that there is a lot going on in A Realm Reborn that a lot of people underestimate. Now, if we go to Shadowbringers, for example, we have a solo duty where we save Reen, and that is it. That is it. Then we have Holminster Switch. We have Key to the Castle, which is the Ilmeg thing. We have Titania, and that is it. In the first 50 quests. that is all. We don't, within the first 50 quests, we do not get to anything in Raktika. Yeah, we get into Raktika, but we don't do anything there. Yeah. Yeah. And then in Dawntrail. Okay, so let's take a look at Dawntrail here. So in Dawntrail, for solo duties, we have fighting against Galul Jaja. We have helping Kuana with the I believe that's like the fighting with the stealth mission. We have taking a stand, which is where we fight as Wuklamat, and then we have the Feet of the Brotherhood, where we fight the Shade of Galul Jaja. And then for dungeons / trials, we have Ikui Tumu, and then over here we have the Valley Garmanda, Workhor Dormor, Workhor. Yeah, so this would be Workhor Dormor, and then Skyruin would be Workhor Lordor or whatever, like the Valley Garmanda fight, the trial. And then down here we have Road to the Golden City, that is Skydeep Cenote. So within 50 quests, you get more, okay? You get way more than what you get in Shadowbringers. And yet Shadowbringers is lauded as the most superior expansion. But in terms of actual combat and interactivity, it is not great. So what's going on here, right? Like if we're talking about amount and variety, Dawntrail is spanking Shadowbringers. And honestly, when I've watched certain content creators going through Shadowbringers, there's a huge amount of hype around it. The audience is there, you know, everyone's cheering everybody on. But there have been moments, and there have been streamers who have pointed it out. There are moments in Shadowbringers where the story drags. So I think there's a bit of a blind spot about Shadowbringers in the community because of what Shadowbringers represents as a narrative. But it also brings me to mind, why is it that people didn't mind that Shadowbringers was, you know, barely there in terms of content in the first 50 quests? Why did nobody care about that in Shadowbringers? Why do they care about it in Dawntrail? Is something else going on? Okay. All right. Well, let's keep solidifying these observations. Am I missing anything? Well, let's take a look at the introduction of other combat content, such as when the first dungeons are first introduced and when is the first role quest started. So this is a huge issue with the role quests. So in A Realm Reborn, Heavensward, and Stormblood, role quests basically begin at the first quest. Essentially. So right off the bat, especially with The Realm Reborn, and then, you know, decreasingly less so in Heavensward and Stormblood, you get these regular role quests that you have to consider and do. And on top of that, in A Realm Reborn, they have a hunting log that you can fill out to help with your leveling as well. So between the hunting log that you are stopping to do in the world, and then your combat quests that you're doing for your role quests from the beginning, and on top of that, all of the additional combat in the MSQ, the amount of combat that Realm Reborn offers a player at the beginning is actually really solid. Like zero complaints here from anybody, I should imagine. And yet, lots and lots of people shit on A Realm Reborn. I honestly don't get it. Now, if we go to Heavensward and Stormblood, we got, once again, if we recall, okay, let's just remind ourselves here, we have expansions with really high combat within the first 25 quests. We can see here that A Realm Reborn is still within the first 50 quests, not lagging at all. So here we have with Heavensward and Stormblood, we have these role quests that add combat on the side, simultaneous next to the MSQ. It is not as much as A Realm Reborn, and there's no hunting log for Heavensward or Stormblood, which it's a shame. They should put hunting logs in for all of the expansions, frankly. But so they don't have the hunting logs, but they do have the role quests that are happening basically every 2 levels. So that's something that the player can do on the side alongside with the quest, and it adds some extra combat opportunities. Usually they should. Now in Shadowbringers, the first role quests, the first time you can start a role quest is in 23, which is soon after Holminster Switch. And in Dawntrail, it also happens fairly early on. It happens on the 23rd quest. Now here's the crazy one, okay? Hold on to your seats here. Endwalker doesn't introduce its role quests until the 62nd quest. So you have to finish 62 quests in Endwalker before you finally open the ability to start your role quest. Mind-boggling. That's something new. That's fresh. That's really, really fresh. Whereas Dawntrail actually gets you into the role quests fairly quickly, like Shadowbringers. But is it as immediate as the first 3 expansions? No. And then, of course, you can see here with the dungeon start, A Realm Reborn starts at the 25th. The 25th quest, you start to go in with your first dungeon. Heavensward, you actually don't get into your first dungeon until level 38. Yeah, 39. 38, 39. I think, in fact, you do a trial before you do your first dungeon. So Heavensward was beating to the, it was marching to the beat of its own drum. Let's just say that. Heavensward was really doing its own thing over there, which is great. I don't mind that at all. You had to wait until your 30th quest before you could get your first dungeon in Stormblood. And then you can see here, there's an overall decrease over time. Shadowbringers got you into your dungeon within 22 quests. Endwalker got you into your first dungeon within 21 quests. And within 20 quests, Dawntrail got you into a dungeon. So Dawntrail got you into the dungeon the fastest out of all of the expansions. So once again, this is looking pretty solid in terms of where, like, how it's trying to get you into combat. But there is still it still felt slow, right? So like what's going on here? Like, really, what is going on here? And this got me thinking. When I was looking at all of these statistics, I got thinking, and I realized that when it comes to the expansions, the early ones might have had maybe slower in some senses because of the lower stakes. Realm Reborn is considered to be very low stakes narrative, but the combat balancing is so much better in comparison to the cutscene amounts. Whereas Endwalker and Shadowbringers were coasting very clearly on narrative investment. So it's clear that the team tried a variety of approaches, but from Stormblood onward, they focused on getting a dungeon out early on in the game and then a trial, okay? And then they would really just lay into the narrative from Shadowbringers onward. There was this high level investment, this deep belief in the narrative that allowed them to not worry so much about creating combat with variety or upping the level of amount of combat. And basically, role quests got sidelined, which I believe happened to a disastrous effect. I actually think that's something they need to reconsider moving forward. And honestly, overall, this really highlighted for me that something was going on with Dawntrail, but it had nothing whatsoever to do with the amount of combat that was happening, because clearly it's not as imbalanced as other expansions have been. So that's basically the thrust of the PowerPoint, but I did have some additional stuff that I wanted to chat about. In terms of staffing, there has been some changes over time. So Kazutoyo, my hero, basically was the main scenario writer for Realm Reborn and Heavensward. And you can see here that if we talk about how many people were involved or were credited in the making of these expansions, both of the development team itself as well as subcontractors and other stuff like that, you can see here that we have Realm Reborn started out with about 1,200 people working on it, and they rose to about 2,300 people working on it. So there was a significant increase of basically around, I would say, 800 plus 300, so around 1,100 people were added in here at least. So there was a significant amount of hiring that was done over the years, and yet for some reason they seem to be struggling with putting out or transforming content at a faster rate. So it does make you wonder what's going on behind the scenes of the studio. I personally don't think it's helpful to make guesses about things that we can only guess at. But what I will say is that we had this singular writer handling A Realm Reborn for the most part, with Banri Oda, the OG, being noted as the world lore creator. So if we want to shake hands with Banri Oda, he's actually one of the brainiacs behind this whole thing, the unsung hero, so to speak, who's been there from the beginning. It's interesting to note that Yoshida-san is actually considered to be one of the lead game designers in the Realm Reborn stage, which he is not credited this position in later games. So that's kind of interesting. I wonder what that actually means. But you can see that the lead game designer was the same from A Realm Reborn through Heavensward and Stormblood. So once again, this is very fascinating because this person here, Nobuaki Komodo, moved to game design supervisor. So he didn't go anywhere, but his title changed. So I'm not sure if there's like a distinction between a lead game designer and a game design supervisor. It sounds like just a title change. I'm not sure. But then there's like a lead quest designer. So then there's lead quest designers. So we had lead game content designer, which is this bro who's been hanging in there for ages. We should give him a pat on the back. Toshiaki Suzuki. So this bro has been here through thick and thin, all the way up through Dawntrail. He's been a lead game content designer, lead quest designer, lead quest system designer. So his title changed, but I have a sense that he's doing the same thing regardless. And it's interesting that in Stormblood, he had help from Banri Oda. How? Why? Don't know. and he had help from Takeshi Tomioka for Dawntrail. So once again, not sure what those people were doing, not sure what Banri or Takeshi Tomioka were doing, particularly with Toshiaki Suzuki, but this seems to be a staple. He is the bro when it comes to designing quests. So all of the up and downs, like the up and downs and the changes between the systems in the game and the balance in the game, clearly this person has always been there. So has this person been changing? Who is responsible for the fact that we have such a variance in combat and cutscenes? Right? Who is responsible for not questioning where Dawntrail was going in terms of the cutscenes? Now, if we go down to the beginning, and just focusing on A Realm Reborn, Heavensward, and Stormblood, you can see that game content designers exist down here. Later on, they're called quest designers, and you can see down here, okay, look at this. I highlighted Natsuko Ishikawa. So she was there from the beginning. She was there in A Realm Reborn, working as basically a basic, I suppose, a basic quest designer or quest writer, right? And you can see here as well, Daiichi Hiroi. Okay, this bro is going to come back, okay? But he's there from the beginning as well. So there's actually, surprisingly, a lot of people who have been chugging away behind the scenes, okay? These are the people who are writing the dialogue boxes for all of the side quests, all of the quests that are happening. These are the people doing a lot of the writing work and the designing work as well. So, like, kudos to these folks over here. But you will notice Daiichi Hiroi and Natsuko Ishikawa. These are major names that will come back in a little bit. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But you can see here that this pool of writers, these people here, some of them would go on to be working in higher positions. So clearly they have been doing writing and designing for a long time. So this is the boots on the ground. So we have to ask, who is telling these people what to do? Well, I would presume that it's somebody like Toshiaki Suzuki or Nobuaki Komodo, right? Like a combination of all of these people are telling these game content designers down here what to write on a dialogue to dialogue basis. So overall, if I was thinking about Dawntrail, the dialogue to dialogue basis, for the most part, except for a couple of issues with translating, I don't think there's any problems. I don't think these are the people that I'm interested really in considering in terms of where were decisions made. The decisions appear to be made probably somewhere between the director, the producers, right? The directors, the producers, the main scenario writers, and the leads on it are probably making the big money decisions, right? So if we get into Stormblood, we have Natsuko Ishikawa and Banri Oda writing the two scenarios. And then Natsuko Ishikawa and Banri Oda are both credited for writing Shadowbringers. And yet for some reason, a lot of people only credit Natsuko Ishikawa. So either the credits are lying, they're lying to us and saying that Banri Oda was writing with Ishikawa, or Banri Oda actually was writing with Ishikawa, and for some reason people have just fixated on Ishikawa as, like, I don't know why Banri Oda is marked underneath there, when before he was marked as a world lore creator. And in fact, he continues to take that position as time goes on. So once again, in lead story designer in Endwalker, they called it, they said Natsuko Ishikawa worked with Banri Oda to do that. So since Stormblood, they've been writing together, or Banri Oda has been continuing his world lore creator and maybe is sometimes called in to write. I'm not sure. But basically, you can see that this is still a team. This is not just a single person getting on a horse and just doing everything on their own. So, yeah. And then we come down to the lead story designers. And this is where things get interesting in Dawntrail. They pull out the bro. Okay, do you remember Daiichi Hiroi, who's been here? He's been plodding along in the lower level quest designer people. He was raised up into the lead story designer. Okay, he had people overlooking his work. Who were overlooking his work? Natsuko Ishikawa and Banri Oda. And who was helping him write? Tomohiro Kawasaki and Megumi Onozuka. Now, you might not know these people, of course, because, you know, this is a name, right? But basically, they have been here for a little while. They are also down here. They're down here in these numbers, as far as I can understand. As far as I recall, these people had some work done already in the company, I believe. So, yeah. So Megumi Onozuka is down here. She's over here. Not sure if she's in Stormblood. Not sure if she's in Stormblood, but she's been around since Shadowbringers for sure. So once again, these people here, they have some knowledge under the belt. They're helping write the story for Daiichi, who has designed the story. But let's all remember, like what we've been told before. Usually Yoshi P, who's the director / producer, he will go off with the designers and the writers, and he probably brings in all of these people probably all sit together and they come up with this together. So I don't think this is a case where Daiichi Hiroi went off into the wild blue yonder, came up with his idea, came back, and everyone's like, yes, sir, yes, sir, sir, yes, sir. Like, there's this sense, okay? There's this weird sense that if Ishikawa came back, then everything would be okay. And I'm like, she was there. She's in the credits. She was the boss. She could have absolutely stepped in and said, hey, bro, what are you doing, bro? Okay, she is the one who is credited for writing Smile. Okay, so if anyone thinks Smile's cringe, that's Ishikawa's baby over there. So what I'm trying to, I guess, point out is there is a lot of dialogue. There was a lot of dialogue anyway. I don't know what it is now, but there was a lot of dialogue that was like, if we bring Ishikawa back, everything will go back to normal. I don't think so. I actually don't think so. Because this is not a question of a single auteur, like, just as far as we can tell, as far as we know. Like, of course, if you're somebody who somehow understands what I'm saying and you're from the team and you want to secretly reach out to me and tell me the true story of what happened behind the scenes, but as far as we can tell, all right, this isn't a case of malicious or single-headed or bullheaded incompetency. This isn't a question of someone like Kojima going off and doing his own thing, okay? Like, this isn't about this isn't the story of an auteur. This is the story of an entire village of people who thought that this was the best choice to make for an expansion. And along the way, I think they forgot a few things that was required for a strong beginning expansion. Because if you look carefully at these people, the only person here who was in the same position as he was in A Realm Reborn at this point in time is Banri Oda and Toshiaki Suzuki, really. Okay, so these two bros are really the only ones who have really, like, kept a similar position, sort of, right? Sort of. Everyone else is fairly new to being in charge of a beginning expansion. And I really want to highlight that because beginning a 10-year cycle, okay? Beginning a 10-year cycle is like going back to A Realm Reborn to a certain degree. And I think it is possible that it might never have occurred to them that instead of looking at their award-winning expansions, they should instead look at the expansion that everybody shits on. Because I think if they had followed through with a more A Realm Reborn focused pacing, if they had gone with more combat and less cutscenes, I think Dawntrail would be in a better position than it is today. And that is my belief. Now, we can ask ourselves some interesting questions like, why is there less combat? How could they have added more combat? And this is where, of course, the narrative, okay? This is where the narrative starts to show the true weakness, okay? But in general, I think there were a lot of people who were like, oh, there isn't enough combat in Dawntrail. Yes, there is not enough combat in Dawntrail, but this has been a problem for a long time. And the lack of variety of combat has been in worse shape in previous, hitherto beloved expansions like Shadowbringers. So this isn't entirely a Dawntrail problem. This is an ongoing trend. And this ongoing trend speaks to perhaps a misunderstanding of why Endwalker and Shadowbringers could work the way they could, and why A Realm Reborn is actually better than what most people think. And I personally also would just like to posit that there is some, I think, some unfortunate misunderstanding as well in terms of how we talk about it. This idea of if we can just get Ishikawa back, if she can come back and save the day. And honestly, I think she was in charge. And at the end of the day, you know, she could step in and say, hey, what are you doing? So to a degree, like, I don't want to sit around blaming people, okay? Like, that's not what my intent here is. I just want to correct, I suppose. I want to push back on some of this discourse that's happening around the narrative, like this glamorization, this, if you will, celebritization of certain writers that people have cottoned onto and think are doing all of the heavy lifting. And indeed, she is a powerful writer, and I love Ishikawa to death. Like, she is fantastic. Never let her go. But every writer, I say that as somebody who has written herself, okay? I'm not coming at this from an armchair critic. I've worked as a ghostwriter. I've written novels for clients. I've written novels for myself. I can tell you that some days you have a bad day. And I feel like on a fundamental management level, people forgot to a certain degree what they needed to accomplish in the beginning of a cycle. And I'm a little worried that they will continue to look at Shadowbringers and Endwalker as their peak content. And it is indeed their narrative peak content, but that narrative is resting on the shoulders, on the weary foundation that is A Realm Reborn, Heavensward, and Stormblood, to varying degrees. So, I guess that I'm trying to suggest that the current team that was running Dawntrail might not have been as fully aware of some of the things that could make A Realm Reborn the stronger expansion. And honestly, I feel that this rise in cutscenes is fine for expansions that have earned it, but for Dawntrail, it was a complete misstep. And so then one asks, what could we do in Dawntrail to fix this? And it's so crazy because on one level, the problem isn't that big, but on the other level, just changing it and trying to fix it would require a large rework of material. And I'm going to explain that, of course, in the coming review sessions. I'm going to talk about various areas that I think would improve on the whole the whole story. So I believe I'm going to be talking a little bit about the setting. That's going to be a tiny itty bitty little video and then a snack, if you will. And then we're going to get into characters. We're going to talk about characters in detail. We're going to talk about the plot in detail over 2 videos. And then we'll talk about what I would have done differently. But I think you can see already that although at first glance, this might feel like a waste of time, right? This might feel like, oh, like, what is she even doing? Like, what's the point here? And I think at the end of the day, I'm glad that I did take this extra step. I wanted to take this extra step to really think about what was going on. And I'm glad I did, because my gut instinct was wrong to a degree. It was quite wrong. We did have more combat than before. But the problem is, is that there's something else that was causing that feeling. It wasn't lack of combat. It wasn't variety of combat either. It was something else, and yeah, we'll get into what that something else is. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you for listening. And if any of you really wants, I can try to make my stats and my PowerPoint more publicly available. If you'd like a PDF or whatever, you can ask. I can see if I can make a link for it or something. But anyway, let me know in the comments below what you think about this data, and was any part of this surprising to you? I think I was surprised by some of my findings, but let me know what you thought, and I shall see you all next time. Take care.